Good afternoon. My name is Diane Tipping and I welcome you all to today's event. In the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We have a packed agenda with only an hour to discuss highly current issues relating to international trade opportunities between Australia and India. Before we commence, I would like to briefly acknowledge that we have online today some participants joining from India and also many participants with deep ties to India, which is facing another wave of COVID infections. We wish them very well under these difficult circumstances. Today, our panel of experts from both the Australian and Indian governments, industry and the private sector will be discussing various aspects of the trading environment between our two great countries. The bios of our expert panelists have been circulated beforehand, so I will not make substantial introductions. The seminar will run as follows. I will invite each of our first four panelists to make a brief remark outlining their key messages. We will then go to a panel discussion where I will ask our private industry panelists questions on how they entered the Indian market and their tips on this topic. Finally, we will hear from Investment New South Wales on how to hit the ground running. Please allow me to set the scene. What is the current trading landscape between Australia and India? With a growing youth population and more disposable income, India is a major power. India's economy is massive, and there are an enormous amount of companies in the small to medium bracket that are ideally placed to work with Australian companies. India-Australia bilateral trade is already strong. India was Australia's 8th largest trading partner and 5th largest export market in 2018-19, driven by coal and international education. Two-way goods and services trade with India was $30.3 billion in 2018-19, and the level of two-way investment was $30.7 billion in 2018. Australia and India have been strategic partners since 2009 and enjoy strong political, economic and community ties. I will now ask our first speaker, the Honourable Barry O'Farrell AO, Australian High Commissioner to India, former Premier of New South Wales, to set the scene on the relationship between Australia and India. I would particularly like to thank the High Commissioner today for joining us during difficult circumstances. I understand that where he is located in India, there is currently a lockdown process in place. Over to you, High Commissioner. We may be having difficulties with getting the High Commissioner online, is that correct? We might move on to the next section just to allow the High Commissioner some time to get connected correctly. May I introduce now the next speaker? And again, Peter Varghese, are you online? I just know that there's some connection issues at your end as well. Okay, we may have connection issues with Peter as well. May I ask the following speaker to please speak? The next speaker is Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, lead author of the Confederation of Indian Industries Australia Economic Strategy. Ambassador, may I ask you to please provide your comments today?
Well, thank you very much, Diane, for getting the floor in the beginning. I didn't expect that, but I'm ready to talk about the prospects between Australia and India and New South Wales in particular. First of all, I'd like to briefly flag what's happened in the Indian domestic scenario over the past year or so, because that relates to these opportunities which had been identified In the two reports that have come out. One of them is a report that I also authored, which is the Australia Economic Strategy Report, and that was launched in November 2020. Now, what's happened in India is that there have been a number of structural reforms that have been undertaken, including deregulation of the agricultural sector. There's been a change in definition of medium and small enterprises. There's a new policy on public sector undertakings and how they deal with the world. The commercialization of coal mining in particular, launch of a new education policy which opens the way for foreign collaborations, and also higher FDI limits in the defense and space sectors, for example. So now we have a production linked incentive scheme in India, which has identified a total of 13 sectors for manufacturing incentives in India. And that covers a range of products from electronics to pharmaceutical ingredients, medical devices, food processing, telecom, textiles, specialty steel, automobiles and components, solar photovoltaic modules, and white goods. And companies registered in India can apply for this PLI incentive, which is linked to an increase in incremental sales over the financial year 2019-20. So that includes reimbursements for additional expenditure on expansion. Therefore, I feel that Australian companies looking at India should take advantage of these opportunities. In essence, therefore, I feel that Australian exporters must look at investments and collaborations as a tool of boosting their exports rather than just looking at pure sales. And that, of course, can go on as it was before. Then once we are out of this pandemic situation, and Diane, you had mentioned our bilateral trade and investments at about $30 billion each, which is not a bad number, but at the same time, we must tap the underutilized opportunities, and there are many of them. Let me briefly pick out some of these from my report, and I would like to elaborate a little bit on them in the current context. First of all, Australia has been identified as a long-term supplier for at least 21 of the 49 minerals which are included in India's critical mineral strategy and for India's e-mobility program. So Australian companies, besides continued exports of coal and iron ore and gold and the traditional commodities, should seriously look at India for investment in the Indian mobility program, the processing of lithium, bidding for processing facilities which have already been budgeted and sanctioned by the government, and also production of lithium-ion batteries. Secondly, there is this unique opportunity we have between us in the textile designing sector. So not just textile, but also its design, because the demand for expanded use of smart textile opportunities provides a twofold collaboration opportunity, not just for Indian textile manufacturers and Australian designers, but also I believe this will be a good commodity for exports to other countries. So Indian low-cost manufacturing coupled with Australia's advanced and new age textile technology can offer Australian textile manufacturers the chance to look at large-scale manufacturing setups at cost competitive level. The third issue I'd like to pick up is about Australian technologies in water. So that's groundwater management, also providing clean drinking water, conservation of water, and also basin development. Again, all fields where Australian companies are quite adept, given the experience back home in Australia, and they can actually scale up offers of niche solutions also in waste to energy and recycling of water technologies in India. The fourth is quite familiar to New South Wales, which is the field of education. And here, from the Indian perspective, we have identified some joint PhD programs, dual degree programs, focus programs in areas of need in both countries. And that includes things like geology, museology, design, etc. Why? Because there is a big demand amongst Indian students for employability, but at the same time to bring down the costs. Now, in order to meet the Indian skilling demands. Also, there is the need for training the trainers program, and then the accreditation of these programs with Australian skilling institutions. That's been identified as a major area which is a desirable. We also identified research collaboration in cutting edge technologies with Australian universities and use of space technologies to map crop and weather patterns by the two governments. Uh, that is essential if we have to bring about some predictability in Australian exports of food products, for example, to India year by year. So that affects your cropping pattern as well. And I believe that India and Australia need to ramp up the collaboration to integrate e-learning solutions into existing curricula and also in enabling teachers to develop online curricula. And I think there's a great benefit in ramping up our startup collaborations because there's a separate proposal for an innovation fund between our two countries in our report, in the Indian report, and that would be of great benefit. Fifthly, India can benefit from Australian grid technologies here because now there is 100% foreign direct investment which is permitted in India for renewable energy generation and also for distribution projects, which also provides an opportunities for Australian companies giving their experience in this sector. There is a new requirement to get pumped up storage projects in India to manage large scale integration of renewable sources of energy and grid balancing. And this has emerged as a good area of collaboration with Australia because this is a new sector in India, but Australian companies have the required experience. Six is the healthcare sector, where Indian healthcare companies are now ready to collaborate with Australian medtech companies, specializing in particular in things like bionics, in implants, monitoring devices, etc., so that they can actually scale up commercial manufacturing in India besides outright sales because that is something which is the way to go in the future. India offers a huge market for these devices, and the demand in the region is also growing. Seventhly, the Australian farm and dairy productivity are very high due to the use of innovative technologies and artificial intelligence, and this is required across the board in the Indian agriculture and dairy sectors as well. So Australian investments in technology have been identified for collaborations in food technology and processing. These all should be explored along with the traditional exports from Australia like walnuts, almond, chickpeas and olives, etc. Eighth, there are opportunities for partnership with Indian agri-tech companies. So who would be interested in acquiring land with some water for growing cotton, walnuts and almonds? Now, these companies will need some handholding. They require some Australian partners. And again, Australian collaborations in India in the food supply chain, in processing and refrigeration, techniques to prevent food wastage. All these present an opportunity as well. There's a growing Indian diaspora, as we know, in Australia, and their eating habits are changing. That has thrown up a lot of opportunity for ready-to-eat Indian food for Australian companies and chains, and manufacturing Australian food processing machinery at a cheaper cost in India. And conversely, Indians are increasingly developing a liking for foodstuff and cuisine from other countries. So once again, that is an opportunity. The ninth is the field of health and geriatric care, collaboration in cancer research and data analysis for health insurance industry, and the standardization of registration procedures. All these present opportunities. In information technology, India presents an opportunity for Australian companies to set up global innovation centers, and Indian companies are increasingly attractive as a source for cybersecurity, for data analysis and cloud technology, all these skills, and also their solutions. So there are opportunities in the fintech sector, And Australia has, for example, a very well developed and digitally enabled SME lending sector, which is of great interest in India. I believe India and Australia need to pool their efforts in digital gaming, in animation technology, and there are blocks on both sides in application development, in blockchains, in AI, machine learning, and these can be filled by joint collaborations. There is also an ongoing research in hydrogen in both countries as an alternative to fossil fuel, and Indian needs are huge here, and Australian companies should look at that in future. In sports technology, stadium and facility technologies, in sports analytics and digital solutions, these are all growing areas of collaboration where there's a surging demand in India. Then, of course, we have the infrastructure companies from India who have an opportunity to work with Australian counterparts in some high value construction projects and also invest in asset recycling opportunities in power and other utilities. So, collaboration and subcontracting should both be explored. The focus in India, of course, in infrastructure is on highways and toll roads post the pandemic. And there we already have the presence of Australian super funds and infrastructure companies, but that can be increased further. 11th is the collaboration in manufacturing specific defense equipment, sea vessels and boats, and launch of satellites. And finally, there is also a niche demand for auto spares and components and tires, especially for tractors and trucks in Australia from India, and in specialty areas like reinforced shock absorbers with specialty materials from Australia to India. So collaboration in this sector again become very important. Finally, just a few tips to round up about collaboration and finding the right partners in India. So Australian companies offering innovative technologies or expertise may fare better when seeking Indian partners, particularly in fields currently subsidized heavily or funded by the government. And that includes things like solar power, agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, aviation technology, drinking water and transport, and food processing infrastructure. And in India, I believe, in my view, it is best to choose partners with specialization and business in the related field. Of course, to this audience, I don't have to emphasize the point about the importance of working with states in India on specific projects related to water, electricity, alternate energy, and investments with long gestation periods. And connections in India are sustained from the heart. Indian interlocutors therefore prefer face-to-face contact, but in today's circumstances, phone calls or video calls can substitute. And it is important, however, in my view, to be persuasive in India. The rewards will follow. Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you, Ambassador. I was just smiling at your comment about phone calls and Zoom calls and things. We haven't had much luck today already. So thank you, Ambassador. I really appreciate your comments and appreciate your being thrown into the deep end so early into the start of the session. I appreciate that very much. I think we now have the High Commissioner online. I will attempt to try and connect with him. High Commissioner, are you there?
I am, and I apologise that I was one of those that had technology problems today.
Thank you for joining us. I appreciate that it's a very difficult circumstance at the moment in lockdown, and really appreciate that you're able to do this in any way. Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce the Honourable Barry O'Farrell, AO, Australian High Commissioner to India, former Premier of New South Wales, to set the scene on the relationship between Australia and India. I would, as I said, really like to thank you for taking all the effort to join us during this difficult moment. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to all gathered online today, especially Chancellor Peter Varghese, who set the high standards for being a High Commissioner to India, and of course Anil Vadva, Ambassador Vadva, who you've just heard from. I want to thank the New South Wales Office of the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Export Council of Australia for organising this event, bringing together businesses who are looking to forge stronger commercial partnerships with India. I also want to begin by acknowledging that India is again battling a surge in COVID cases. Like Australia's second wave last year, COVID has returned here aggressively and causing even more deaths. But the world's second most populous nation is also rolling out its vaccine program faster than anywhere else. More than 130 million people have already had the jab, and today's local news details that one of India's many vaccine manufacturers has upped its production to 700 million doses a year. India recovered strongly after the first wave of COVID-19 last year, and centre and state governments in tackling the current wave are determined to do so again. Last year also, our two Prime Ministers elevated the bilateral relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Last week, talking here in India via a virtual engagement, Prime Minister Morrison described the CSP as, quote, a declaration of our shared values and interests, our capabilities, and the deep trust we have for each other. And he said that partnership will see us cooperate in new ways: commerce, critical minerals, science and research, technology, as well as defence, maritime and cyber and critical technology issues. Under the agreement, Australia and India also cooperated to re-engage on a bilateral trade agreement. Officials and ministers are currently discussing the best ways to progress that comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, building on the earlier bilateral negotiations. As all of our economies work to recover from the pandemic, India's young demographic, burgeoning consumer base, hunger for innovation, and ongoing economic reform agenda make it, in my view, an attractive destination for Australian business. There are opportunities in mining and critical minerals, health and pharmaceuticals, education and trading, food and beverages. Both Peter Varghese earlier report and the December report authored by Ambassador Vadva for the Confederation of Indian Industry detail specific opportunities, and both those reports can be accessed online. For instance, growing trade in agricultural products is creating opportunities for Australian commodities, including walnuts, almonds and wool. Our commodities are also supplying raw inputs to drive India's increase in food processing and its Make in India mission. Beyond this webinar, I also encourage you to participate in the Australia-India Business Exchange, the government's flagship trade investment promotion program. Under ABEX, as it's called, Austrade is delivering a series of initiatives to showcase Australian capability, connect businesses with each other across the Indian Ocean, and build market understanding over coming months. Can I just reinforce the last thing that Ambassador Vadva said? One of the easiest ways to enter India in doing business is to try and find the best possible partner you can, and that's where the new ABEX program offered by Austrade can be particularly helpful. So I look forward to continuing to work with business and our Indian partners in furthering our mutual economic benefits and deepening bilateral relationships. And I hope that there are some on this call who I get to meet here in coming months and years as they continue to do business in India. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner. First of all, thank you again for your trouble to connect, even though we had some issues. And I agree with all of your points and comments. You've provided some really compelling points and set the scene for some really good discussion as we move on in this seminar. Thank you again. I would like to now introduce Jay Patel, I was going to ask Peter to see if he was online, but I don't think he is. So we will move on to Jay Patel. He's the head of India business practice at KPMG Australia, and he will discuss getting into the Indian market. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much, Diane. And a very good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, to all participants from Sydney, where I'm based. It's a great privilege to be participating in today's webinar. And I'd like to thank both DFAT New South Wales as well as the Export Council of Australia for the opportunity. As Diane mentioned, I lead KPMG Australia's India business practice, which is a dedicated function we've had for about 15 years now, focused on the two-way trade and investment flows between Australia and India, advising and assisting clients operating this corridor across the breadth of our firm's service offerings. So ranging from market entry strategy, business entity setup through to tax, regulatory, compliance, deals and due diligence, etc. We work very closely with KPMG in India, which is now a firm of over 10,000 partners and staff with offices across 14 cities. And that's to ensure that our Australian clients have access to the most relevant Indian subject matter expertise and quality advice on the ground. So what I'd like to do today is share some high-level considerations for entering the Indian market and doing business there. And as part of that, I'll touch on some key tax and regulatory aspects. I'll also highlight a couple of specific business opportunities that may be of interest to many of you. But before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge my preceding speakers, High Commissioner O'Farrell and Ambassador Vadva, for their eloquent and most insightful articulations of the new India that is today, the India growth story, and of course the related opportunities that presents for Australian businesses. And in that context, I'd also like to note that notwithstanding the challenges of COVID-19, India has largely remained open for business, and the government's economic reform agenda has continued, if not accelerated. So several key measures, some of which are aimed at increasing foreign participation across various industry sectors in India, have been introduced during this pandemic period, and I will touch on some of them during my presentation. So moving on to some high-level market entry considerations, the key or central point I'd really like to make is around where you set up or initially focus in India. So India is a large and culturally diverse country, but moreover, it's a highly heterogeneous market. It's not a homogeneous market like Australia, and so tastes, preferences, attitudes, buying behaviours and patterns can differ from one state or region to the other. So we typically advise Australian businesses entering the Indian market for the first time to focus on one particular state or region and to localise or contextualise their offering for that location before they think about a broader pan-India presence. Generally speaking, businesses will need to adjust their pricing, placement and marketing strategies to suit the local market. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that with over 700 million smartphone users in India today, e-commerce is undoubtedly a popular sales channel, and social media serves as a powerful marketing platform. The exclusive Australian store on Amazon India's website is one such channel for showcasing and retailing Australian consumer items. The decision around which state or region you set up in or initially focus on may also be influenced by the availability of skilled labour and proximity to strategic partners, distributors, suppliers and regulators. So for example, if your offering relates to the finance sector, then Mumbai, being the financial capital, is the obvious choice, as compared with, say, technology and manufacturing activities, where the southern states of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, etc. Probably make more sense. Another key market entry consideration is the availability of relevant incentives, and they might be sector or location wise. And in that regard, the ambassador did allude to it, but the concept of competitive federalism is very much at play amongst the states for attracting business, including foreign participation. So certainly worth doing a deeper dive to understand what's on offer from a state-by-state basis. States like Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh generally rank highly in terms of overall business friendliness. I'll just move on now to actually doing business in India and make some initial remarks on the ease of doing business, and then touch on some of the key tax and regulatory considerations. The government, the current government since coming into power in 2014 has embarked on a comprehensive economic reform agenda. And as part of that, specific measures have been introduced which are directed at the ease of doing business. So today, the majority of sectors welcome foreign participation without seeking prior regulatory approval. Where approval is required, there's generally a single window clearance mechanism for that. Relevantly to this audience, B2B e-commerce and single brand product retail trading comes under the automatic approval route. But of course, depending on your industry sector, there may be other regulations, registrations and the like which need to be taken into account. Some other specific measures introduced over the past few years which have improved the ease of doing business in India, and importantly also which provide business with greater certainty, include firstly the company incorporation and setup process. So that's been dramatically streamlined. It's effectively now one online application and includes your required tax registrations. Secondly, since 2017, a single national GST replaces a range of complex state-based indirect taxes and means that goods can now move freely across the country without documentation hurdles and delays at each border checkpoint. Third, some 44 disparate labour laws have now been consolidated into 4 codes, and these serve to simplify employers' compliance, but also expand certain protections for new industry sectors and categories of workers. Finally, the new bankruptcy and insolvency code has been successfully implemented, providing businesses and related stakeholders with greater certainty through a well-defined and time-bound process. Moving to tax and some other relevant regulatory, particularly for Australian exporters, the first point I'd like to make is in relation to tariffs and India's import regulation. So the tariff system is complex and the rates can be high. India's average tariff is around 13.4%, compared to China's at 9.9% and Australia at 2.5%. Tariffs and import regulations vary between industries and are frequently revised and subject to change without notice. So today there are current proposals to make registration and audit mandatory for foreign food manufacturing facilities that export certain categories of food products to India. Product labelling and packaging requirements can be quite onerous, and Indian customs undertake detailed inspections before allowing imported items into the local market. Just to touch on direct and indirect taxes more specifically, on the corporate tax front, there's been significant reform, especially since 2019, with the government lowering the base corporate tax rate to 22% from 30% and to 15% from 25% for new manufacturing companies. Startups currently enjoy a 3-year tax holiday. I mentioned the GST, and that's divided into 4 slabs, 5, 12, 18 and 28% depending on the type of good or service. And in April of last year, as the pandemic took hold and digitalisation accelerated, India was quick to introduce a 2% digital tax on the sale of goods and services by overseas e-commerce operations. So that's certainly one to be factoring into your business and financial models. Just to summarise on ease of doing business, tax, regulatory, whilst some significant advancements have taken place, there remain complexities and nuances, especially at the specific sector or subsector level, as well as location-wise, and they need to be worked through carefully. It's a dynamic environment, and so my advice to Australian clients is always, as has been mentioned, is to have a local partner, but also access to quality advisors who can help you navigate the lay of the land and respond appropriately at any given point in time. 2 specific areas of opportunity I wanted to highlight. The first is the new International Financial Services Centre, or IFSC, within the Gift City Business District in Gujarat. So that's focused on attracting domestic as well as global financial services sector players to create India's first global financial hub. With world-class infrastructure and high-tech facilities, plus a range of tax incentives and other regulatory exemptions, in my mind, the IFSC presents a wonderful opportunity, for example, for New South Wales-based fintechs, asset management companies and the like, who are looking to scale up and access not only the Indian market, but global opportunities. And as of February this year, the IFSC is also open to ancillary service providers, such as professional services firms engaged in accounting, tax, legal, secretarial, etc. The second area, and I think the Ambassador mentioned it, relates to one of the government's key flagship programs, Make in India, which is all about positioning India as a global manufacturing hub. To To bolster that program, the government has recently introduced the production-linked incentive scheme across the 13 sectors: electronics, mobile phones, food processing, textiles, white goods, battery storage, etc. And that incentive is in the form of a cash rebate ranging from 4 to 6% on the basis of achieving certain production value targets. So if you are a business looking to take your manufacturing IP to India to scale up and access both the Indian as well as other overseas markets, then that's definitely one incentive to look into further. In closing, I thought I'd just leave you with some personal reflections on the Australian economic relationship broadly, and particularly from the Australian side, where we often hear about the unrealised potential. And my humble view is that much of this resides with Australian SMEs and startups and not just the big end of town. After all, the Indian SME and startup sectors account for much of the entrepreneurship and growth that we see across Indian industry today. And therefore, there is certainly a role for their Australian counterparts to play. So I do encourage Australian businesses, one and all, to carefully study the Indian market, to unpack the opportunity for themselves and to pursue specific strategies and plans for penetrating the market there. Yes, this will require a dedicated and long-term focus, a given level of investment, including investing and developing strong, reliable and trustworthy working relationships with local partners and advisors, but ultimately for a handsome reward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Very, very savvy advice. And I believe our audience should really consider seriously everything you have said. You've talked about customs and borders and duties and taxes. Very, very important as part of the export journey. Thank you again. Thank you. We have actually been able to connect with Peter Varghese. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Wonderful. Yes, we can. I'd like to introduce Peter Varghese, AO, Chancellor of the University of Queensland, former Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, author of the India Economic Strategy, who will discuss India and Australia, the commercial proposition. And following on from the Ambassador's comments, welcome, Peter. Please commence.
Well, thank you very much, and my apologies that technology has defeated me and I haven't been able to connect on screen, which means I've missed what our earlier speakers have said. So I hope I don't cover too much of the same ground. I wanted to start just by noting that this is a very tough time for India, given this second wave of COVID and the extent to which it is now spreading in India, and we all hope that India is able to deal with that and to get back onto a path of recovery. And I guess that raises the larger macro question about the trajectory of the Indian economy in the post-COVID period. Now, clearly, India, like just about every other economy in the world, has taken a hit from COVID. In India's case, it's been a substantial hit. But even before COVID, there were signs that the Indian economy was beginning to slow down. My own sense is that just as COVID has knocked around many of our economies, it will probably have an impact on the Indian economy which would last certainly all of last year and much of this year. So it's probably the case that this is a 2-year diversion, if you like, for the Indian economy. But I think the prospects for something approaching a V-shaped recovery of the Indian economy once it's out of the COVID woods still looks to me to be quite good. Certainly the earlier IMF and other projections before this most recent wave was showing a very strong projected rebound of the Indian economy. And I think one of the reasons why we can have a measure of confidence that that rebound will come, the timing of it I think is now more up in the air, is that the drivers of economic growth in India are deeply structural, which suggests to me that the trend line will resume after a COVID detour. And those drivers, of course, include the urbanisation of the world's largest agricultural population, the movement from the informal economy, where the vast majority of Indians are employed, to the formal economy, the very significant investment in infrastructure, which has historically been a bottleneck for India's economic growth, and providing the policy settings are correct, India's very young demography, which is a long-term asset for the Indian economy. So I think the headline story for Australian exporters still is, as I tried to argue in the report that I did for the Prime Minister in 2018, is still that if you take a medium to long-term view of the Indian economy, there is probably no other single economy anywhere in the world that offers more growth prospects for Australia if we're prepared to take advantage of the opportunities. So I think that the scale of the Indian economy is obviously one factor, but really the key factor in that judgment is the structural complementarity between a growing Indian economy, and I'm talking now post-COVID, and the Australian economy. In other words, many of the things that India is going to need as its economy kicks back into gear, and I'm still reasonably hopeful that the 6 to 8% annual growth over the next 2 decades will prove to be a realistic trend line. That complementarity will be very important. And of course now, with geopolitics having a very big impact on the way in which countries are perceiving concepts such as self-reliance, security of supply chains and so on, I think India is high on everybody's list of how to diversify their economy to give them more resilience. So that remains very much my long-term view. In terms of sectors, the 4 sectors that I identified, in my view, still remain the medium to long-term focus. Education, which is, in my view, likely to be the flagship of our future economic relationship. I think the challenge here is going to be to move up the quality curve in our education relationship with India. Indian students coming to Australia are driven largely by a migration objective, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we also need to be looking to invite Indian students to come to Australia with a view to getting a first-class education, and they may or may not wish to return to India or to stay in Australia. So I think that's essentially focusing on postgraduate education. It's focusing on collaborative research. It's focusing on the science, technology, and innovation agenda. But it's also how we can partner with India to work on course content to be delivered online in India, because if you want to upskill 400 million people, which is India's extraordinarily ambitious but necessary objective, that's not going to be a bricks and mortar story, that's going to be an online story. And so how Australia and India can work on the design of curriculum, I think, is going to be a big part of the education story. and then vocational education, because the gap in vocational skills in India will only get bigger and bigger, and Australia has, I think, quite a deal to offer to India to work in partnership, as long as we can reinvent our own vocational business models to cater for a very high volume, low cost Indian market, not like obviously the Australian market, which is the opposite. I think on energy, which was one of the key sectors in my report, we now have, I think, looking to the future and looking to the climate change agenda, the prospect of hydrogen becoming a significant part of our future energy export mix, in addition to LNG, and at least in the short to medium term, I expect coal will continue to be required in the Indian market, and uranium is another energy source from Australia which is of relevance to India. On the agricultural sector, I think beyond India as a market for our agricultural commodities, and it's a significant market in its own right, I think the prospect of going up the value chain in terms of food processing, joint ventures in food processing and value add, is something that we should be looking very closely at, as well as a partnership between Australian expertise and Indian demand in relation to managing logistics and the supply chains in agriculture, particularly with wastage being a big issue in the Indian market. Tourism obviously is going to be delayed in terms of it being a very big part of the future economic relationship. That's all going to depend on when international borders open. The timing on that, I think, is very much up in the air, but unlikely this year, beginning to emerge again next year. And in terms of other sectors, particularly the services sector, I think there remain very strong opportunities for Australia in health services. Everyone's focused much more on health services as a result of COVID. Financial services, including fintech, I think will remain a very important element in the relationship. Infrastructure is already big, particularly with companies like Macquarie in India. So that sectoral focus, I think, is a key to the way in which Australians should be thinking about where to enter the Indian market and how to enter such a big and complicated market. And I've identified 10 sectors where I think Australia has a measure of comparative advantage into the long term.
Sorry, Peter, I have to ask you to conclude if you can, please. We've got a fair few to go through as well of panelists still to talk to, and I do thank you. I know it's been a challenge, and I know that we've cut you short, but I do thank you very much. Would you like to just finish, conclude with some comments, please?
Yeah. So let me just make two concluding comments. One is I think people looking to do business with India from Australia should not forget the investment element of the relationship and the need to think about trade and investment as twins that can help each other. And in the long term, I think the investment relationship will be a key part of the economic relationship. And the last thing I'd say is that, I think the key advice, and I hope this is consistent with what previous speakers have said, for anyone looking to either enter the Indian market for the first time or to build on a presence in the Indian market are what I call the 3 Ps. In other words, perseverance, because this is not a market that you can enter into quickly and get quick returns from. Preparation, very important to understand the nature of the market, why India is distinctive, what the business culture is like, and finally, partnership, because I think the many of the successful business models between Australia and India rest on finding a good partner and then working closely together with them. So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Peter. We are thrilled that we've been able to have you both today, yourself and the Ambassador. Both of your knowledge of the required strategies for this relationship is not only spot on, but very timely and welcome. And again, thank you so much, Peter. I know this was difficult to connect, and we appreciate that you did take so much effort to try and connect. Very, very thankful. Thank you. Again, shall we move on to our next area? Our next topic is, how did we do it? We are very fortunate today to have 3 Australian exporters that have succeeded in India. We have Margaret Foe, a solicitor and founder and CEO of Synapse Medical. We have Leon Scaliotis, Sales and Marketing Director of Flavortech. And we have Tim Regan, Chief Operating Officer, the George Institute for Global Health. I'm going to ask the panellists some questions in relation to their successes and pitfalls in exporting to India. Firstly, Leon, can you tell us briefly about Flavortech and your entry into the Indian market?
Of course. Thank you, Diane. And I'd like to say thank you to the Export Council and DFAT for the invitation. First of all, I should explain that Flavortech is a company that's based in Griffith, New South Wales, and we manufacture processing equipment that is used in the food, beverage and pharmaceutical industry. We've been exporting around the world to over 60 countries, and it's highly likely that you've eaten or drunk something that's been processed through our technologies without even knowing it. Flavortech is a very well-regarded secret, but in some industries it's very well known. So if you've been to Japan and you've had canned coffee, very likely that it's been processed on our equipment. If you've had iced tea in the US, very likely that it's been processed on our equipment. And many of the flavors that are in a lot of the food products, many of the natural flavors that are in food products that you purchase from the supermarket may have been made using our technologies. We were very honoured to actually receive the 2018 National Manufacturing Category Award from the Australian Export Council. And both in 2017 and 18 were the winners of the manufacturing category for New South Wales. Last year, we were very honoured as well to receive the Export Council's National Resilience and Recognition Award for New South Wales in what was a very tough year for everybody due to COVID, but also for us. And we did have the factory empty for several months, but managed to engage all our staff, keep them motivated, have them working on other projects to get us going as soon as COVID was over. So a few projects there, some new technologies, and adapting to the change, which is now Zoom meetings and Teams meetings and doing business differently around the world. Now, for us, that also involved the installation and commissioning of our equipment around the world, which of course, without being able to travel, becomes very difficult. But using technology, it made it a lot easier. So, and lately we've also been using augmented reality glasses with our customers to help them through. Getting back to the question, Diane.
Thank you.
Before you cut me short, the story for Flavortech in India started back in the early 90s when a small spice company out of Kerala contacted us and said they saw potential opportunities to use our equipment to make a particular product that they were using spent mustard seed to process to produce a chemical that is used to make wasabi. So you've probably had wasabi that's now been processed. You know, so we sold them that equipment. It was very successful, and that company grew. But you know, for many years afterwards, until the late noughties, there was very little business between Flavortech and India, and the reason, looking back at that, was the fact that we were only going once or twice a year, and that is not sufficient enough time to actually build the strong relationships that are required to do business in India. In 2008, Flavortech went through and put together a business plan, and India was selected as one of the key markets for us to invest our time and efforts in developing. Key reasons for that was the fact that there was a lot of similarities between Australia and India. Population's not one of them, that's for sure, but the similarities included that we both speak English, we both like a good game of cricket, and there was no more to say. But we also saw the fact that our technologies could benefit a lot of those agricultural companies that were in India, that were producing products, but using old traditional techniques of boiling and etc. But also agricultural producers that were looking at value adding to their products. Now, when we approached India, we saw that, you know, it's a vast country. Companies are all over the place, and they're not always located in the major cities. The factories are not always located in the major cities. So my first few trips to India were real eye-openers. You know, each state spoke a different language, had different food, there was different customs. But it was very interesting, but everybody wanted to improve. So we made some good connections, and we started going back almost monthly to India. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we would spend 2 weeks in India, seeing the same customers over and over again to build those relationships. And I have to say that from that, and also from assistance from Oz Industry, or as or under their new name, we were able to do marketing, be present at conferences and exhibitions, and get our name out there and network. The orders started coming in, and part of that relationship was the fact that we didn't see the companies that bought our products as customers, but more as partners. We helped them develop their product, and then we networked with our global customers around the world to help them get the sales they required to start exporting their products and to grow their business. Many of those companies have come back time and time again to purchase more equipment as they have grown. And I mean, a couple of key examples is a honey producer in India and the thing is, you know, you say why honey? Well, a lot of the growers or the apiarists were adding water to the honey to sort of bulk up the volume to get paid more, and they were looking at a way of removing that water without damaging the efficacy of the honey or the color of the honey. Well, that particular company grew, and every year was purchasing a new $1 million plus piece of equipment from us as their company grew. Their products considered one of the best in India. That little spice company that first approached us as well, because we helped them and developed them and helped them make contacts all around the world, they're now the largest spice and botanical extract company in India. And they're based in Kerala. They have multiple pieces of equipment from us. And that's been part of the networking and part of the partnership to help them make the best quality products to differentiate themselves from their competitors around the world. And I've got to say, you know, what Peter mentioned just now is spot on. You've got to look at your market, and for us it was very industry specific. We made a plan, and really we didn't see these companies as customers, we saw them as partners. We are still working with them, and that's created some great relationships, including invitations to Indian weddings. And I have to say, you have to go through an Indian wedding, you know, 3 days plus. I stayed for 27 hours. But it was way too much for me. And it's a great culture, and of course great curries. But great place to do business from our perspective, and it's a growing place for Flavortech.
Thank you, Leon. Sounds fun. I'd love to do one of those weddings. Thank you. Can I ask you, Tim Regan from the George Institute, to provide some quick insights, if I can ask you, into the journey for the George Institute into India?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Diane, and I will be quick. So look, welcome and namaste, everyone. The George has been in India since 2007. We're a medical research institute that does research into non-communicable diseases. And our founders recognised back in 1999 that mainly global research, particularly in lower and middle income countries, was a lot to do with maternal health, child health, and also infectious diseases. But as Western lifestyles kicked in and people obviously exercise less and ate less healthy foods, non-communicable diseases like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, kidney disease, mental health and injuries were on the rise. And they have been like that for the last 20 years, and they're continuing to increase. And countries which are rapidly urbanising, such as India, China and others, are going to experience some real challenges. So our goal is really to help look at better treatments, better care and healthier societies. We set up in India in 2007 in Hyderabad. Probably just some quick tips. Our province or a state, sorry, is as big as a country in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, and close to 200 million people. Was a great base for us in the beginning, and we were able to work closely with government with a good relationship with the Chief Minister. We then moved to Delhi, where you've got to be close to the seats of power. And look, not everyone has to be in Delhi, but you're involved in policy and government. It's important to do so. And for us, it's been a great journey. And I suppose now we're very close to government and helping a lot with COVID. And don't have enough time to tell you about all those projects, but they are going very well. And I feel for all our colleagues in India. Lastly, George Clinical Research business focused very much on doing phase 3 and 4 trials for pharma. India is a great place to be. It's historically a generic drug environment, but it's definitely growing with blockbuster drugs, and our office in Bangalore is keeping busy. So hopefully that was quite quick. Happy to be contacted by anyone, but back to you, Diane.
That's very kind of you, Tim, and I'll remind all participants today that you're very welcome to connect with the ECA, and we can connect you if required to more information and to some information about the panel, all the panelists today. We now have Margaret, and very quickly, Margaret, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but we do need to be quick. Margaret from Synapse Medical, can you please give us a very quick overview on your business? And I would really like to understand how hard it may have been or not may have been for you as a woman to go into the Indian market.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Diane. Thanks, everyone. I will be as quick as I can be, given we're very pressed for time. Look, we are a team. Synapse is a team of 100 people in 3 countries: Australia, India, and Dubai, and the UAE. Over 80 of our team are in Chennai, India, which is our main delivery centre. I've been doing business in India for 10 years, but travelling in India for 30, having first gone to India as a backpacker. So 2 decades later, when I was setting up a new business, I was naturally drawn back to India. Seemed like a very natural fit for me. I chose Chennai in South India, not only because I had fond memories of attending the 1990 Madras Film Festival, but because there was a highly educated population. Also proximity to Australia. I knew I'd be spending a lot of time in India, so I could, prior to COVID, I could leave Sydney at midday, be on the ground in Chennai at 10 p.m. that night local time, go to the hotel, have a good night's sleep, be in the office next morning, didn't miss a beat. And I would recommend to other Australian companies, you do need to, nurture those relationships, be on the ground. I started with a phased approach. I started by outsourcing, contracting with Indian companies, but as we grew, I decided to shift and incorporate my own Indian office and bring everything in-house. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those arrangements. But we probably don't have time to talk about those right now. Other obvious advantages are there's no language barrier. It's a Westminster system of democracy, and as a lawyer, I tend to see the world through a legal lens. So India's really, the legal processes are very familiar. You know, incorporating a proprietary limited company in Australia is not that much difference to incorporating a private limited company in India. And to be honest, the whole process was actually pretty straightforward. For Australians thinking of dipping a toe into the Indian market, just be mindful of things like the chai factor. I call it, you have to drink lots of cups of delicious chai with potential partners in India, and that suits me because I love a chai. You, as Jay correctly said, you need a very good local lawyer. You do need that. A commercial lawyer, good corporate background experience, and also human resource experience, because the employment law in India really does take the whole human resource complexities to dizzying new heights. So you do need some help there. Don't go it alone. In terms of being a woman in business, I have found the Indian business community to be very welcoming of me as a female business leader. There are challenges being a woman in business anywhere in the world. I experience them in Australia too. In fact, my most recent experience of having someone mansplain something to me in a business context happened a couple of weeks ago here in Sydney. So I don't perceive those challenges to be India specific. They relate to doing business as a woman. Last thing I would say as a tip for women, connect with the chambers of commerce. So there's the Australia-India Business Council, and the women's chapters headed up by Sheba, an impressive, powerful female leader. In the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce, where I'm very involved at the moment, we have Petula, another fine female leader, and the Confederation of Indian Industry Women's Network is a force to be reckoned with. So there's a lot of support for women entering the business market, and I would encourage any other Australian female business leader or any business leader to enter the Indian market. You really can't afford not to have an India strategy, I don't think, as we move into the post-COVID world. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Margaret. Well said. And I do agree totally with your points on the Australia-India Business Council and the Indian Confederation of Industries, and in particular Sheba and Petula, who are very, very, very strong women that are there to help and assist anyone that wants, women and men that want to look at the Indian market. I would like to, may I also thank Leon and Tim. Sorry, Margaret, I singled you out then. Thank you everyone for being so generous with your time. And there are so many questions I'd like to ask, but we do not have the time. And as I said, people are welcome to connect with the ECA, and we can forward those questions on and come back to anyone that would like to have any information. Finally, I would like to introduce Carly Bell, Executive Director, Trade and International Investment, New South Wales. And Carly will provide some key points on how to hit the ground running. Carly, can you tell us some of your interesting information on what you're doing in India or with India, please?
Well, firstly, let me just thank all the speakers, because I feel like they've done a fantastic job in answering this question for me. So I'm actually not going to talk too much about how to hit the ground running, because I think the team, and look, I've been working with people like Margaret, Leon and Tim, and certainly the Ambassador and the High Commissioner for the last at least 10 years. And so their passion and commitment to the Indian market, as is the New South Wales government, is clear. What I will do is just talk very briefly about some of the programs the New South Wales government is delivering to support exporters in both India and other markets. At the moment, we have a deep I guess, passion for working with businesses in the Indian market. And I feel like it started 10 years ago when the High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell was in fact our Premier, and started travelling to the state and pushed us to set up an office in Mumbai, which we have done and are now expanding. So at the moment we do work very closely with Austrade and the Indian government in India to support companies. We have a program called Going Global, which is a program where we handhold New South Wales businesses for up to 10 months in particular industry cohorts, and work with them to succeed in the Indian market. So at the moment, very much aligned with Ambassador Wadwa's India strategy and the work that Peter Varghese have also done, the sectors we're focused on at the moment are food, agriculture and beverages, for obvious reasons. A market the size of India will always be a fantastic consumer and net importer of food and beverages and so on. The other sector we're looking at is medtech and the healthcare sector, and that aligns with the work that Tim and Margaret are also doing in India. And the final category that we're working with now is, of course, in clean tech. And so at the moment we're in the phase of working with businesses to connect them with buyers in the Indian market, and we work very closely with Austrade and partners in doing that. I will say that's on the back of a $1.6 million program where we took nearly 100 businesses to India 2 years ago. And so in terms of demand from New South Wales companies, we find that India is very strong. What I will just talk very briefly about is we are in the process of expanding our international network, and in particular the work that we do in India. By the end of this year, we'll have grown our office that focuses on trade, investment and tourism in Mumbai to a much larger team. And we'll be also partnering with Austrade and the fantastic team there led by Catherine Gallagher to put in people in Bangalore and Delhi as well. And so I just wanted to highlight that there is a very passionate group of people from across government and industry that are here to work with New South Wales businesses and indeed Australian businesses to help them succeed. And we're here, you know, this team included. I know Tim and Margaret and Leon would also be available to talk about their personal experiences. I lived myself in India for 5 years, where I was the Trade Commissioner in Mumbai, and I am certainly incredibly passionate about the opportunity. And there is almost an opportunity for everything in India. You've just got to find the right partner. As the team have said, the opportunities are endless. And I guess just to conclude, we're here to work with you, to help you find that wonderful partner, and to leverage all the tips that the team have outlined for you, including the fantastic Jai Patel, who also gave some really good practical advice for you. So I'll wrap up there because it's 3:40 and we're 10 minutes over.
Thank you, Carly. And I do want to confirm that you have a very, very focused team and committed team behind the Indian program with Investment New South Wales, and they do a great job. So thank you again for your time. I would like to close off today and just comment that I hope that today's session has provided our audience with insights and perspectives that may inform their planning and decision making for 2021 and onwards. Australian traders have always been agile, but we are living in extraordinary times. That is why today's briefing from people in the know is so important. As a footnote, we at the Export Council believe export opportunities between Australia and India are exceptional and should be considered by all exporters of services and/or goods. I would like to conclude today by thanking DFAT New South Wales. DFAT New South Wales is one of the many diplomatic posts in the DFAT network. They support business as a key priority. The Australian government's network is well positioned to provide valuable information to the business community on global, political and economic developments. And they have market insights. DFAT have 60 market insights available on their website, and we would recommend very much, particularly the Indian one, but all of them are good. Please go to their website and look at the snapshot of business conditions and opportunities in individual markets. Let me now thank our distinguished guests, the Honourable Barry O'Farrell, AO High Commissioner to India, Peter Varghese, AO, Chancellor of the University of Queensland, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary Minister of External Affairs, Jai Patel, Head of India Business Practice, KPMG Australia, Margaret Foe, Solicitor, Founder and CEO, Synapse, Medical, Leon Scaliotis, Sales and Marketing Director, Flavortech, Tim Regan, Chief Operating Officer, the George Institute for Global Health, Carly Bell, Executive Director, Trade and International Investment New South Wales. And to our audience, thank you for joining today. Good afternoon.